Alright guys, the Enlightenment in Europe. So make sure you have your notes out with this, and if you need to stop or pause or do whatnot, you can get the amount of notes you want down. Alright? Okay, so the Enlightenment. This is right after the scientific revolution. Okay, let's go back. We saw with the Renaissance, it was an explosion in art and literature. The scientific revolution was more in medical, astronomy, still questioning the church and all of that. And then the Enlightenment was after those two times. This is the people that saw what went on in the scientific revolution and then took those principles of questioning and looking at things differently, and they put it towards aspects of society. They put it in government, in your religion, your economics, and your education. And what we're going to do is look how those things were affected because of the previous thinkers of the scientific revolution. So, philosophes. These guys were like the thinkers, like philosophers during the time. Two major ones that you need to know is Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. These names should be familiar to you. If not, you'll learn about them now. Okay, Thomas Hobbes. His view was that he looked at us as humans as selfish and wicked. Basically saying that we always have our self-interest first. We don't care about the regular person. It's us first, other people last. He believed that you needed that big government in order to keep order. He said there would be war of every man against every man, saying that we needed control. If we were left with our own devices, it would be chaos. Our life would be sad, poor, nasty, and short. He said in order for us to get out of that situation, of that horrible life, that we had to give up our rights. Give up our rights to a ruler. In exchange for that, we got protection, we got law, we got order, and he called that thing called a social contract. He wrote about it. And he said, again, people were selfish, that we acted in our own self-interest, so we needed a ruler who had total control over us to keep us under control. The best government, he said, was that of a leviathan, a sea monster, this huge, massive thing. He was a big fan of big government. He wanted government to affect everybody's lives. He wanted it to micromanage everybody's lives. He wanted an absolute monarchy. Nobody can say anything to the government. The government was always right. And that's what he called his social contract. He wrote this book, The Leviathan, this huge sea monster, massive, in 1651. This is the cover of the book. There's your sea monster right up here. It's a ruler, king, crown over town. John Locke, on the other hand, different view than Hobbes. He said that, we learn from our mistakes. It was okay. We're always trying to improve ourselves. We don't want to be controlled. He said that we do have this natural ability to look after our own selves. We do generally want what's best for society because then we benefit from it. So we as humans make mistakes, but we have to learn from them. We don't need to be controlled. He did not like absolute monarchy. He liked self-government, something that we have here, correct? According to Locke, he felt that people were born free and equal with three natural rights: life, liberty, and property. Do those sound familiar to you? He called them the natural rights of man. If you had to guess which one of these guys that our founding fathers looked to. He said the purpose of government was to protect those natural rights. Natural rights are your inalienable rights. Those are what are given to you by God, basically. You cannot take away those things. If the government fails to do those things of protecting your natural rights, we, the people, have a right to overthrow the government. And he wrote that in the two treaties of government in 1690, putting that out. If you notice 1690, and when did our revolution happen in 1776? A little bit under 100 years. This is a picture of his book. That's John Locke. So his natural rights basically set the stage for our modern political thinking. It's what we look to today. We still use a lot of his thought. He said that government's power comes from the consent of people. That means that we give the government power. Without us, the people, the government has no power. Basically, that's what became our modern democracy. We elect our people. If we do not like them, there's systems set in place that we can get rid of them if they violate any ethical rules. And if we don't like them, we don't have to vote for them. We, the people, are the ones who control government. I want you to, on your notes, compare and contrast Hobbes and Locke's point of view about government. Okay? Which one do you think is more like our society today? And how did you think Locke's ideas changed the way people thought? So this idea of this government, this popular consent, the right to rebel, remember what Locke said, if the government did not give us the protection of our rights, we had a right to overthrow the government. This is what basically inspired us for liberty in Europe and the Americas. And two of the major revolutions that happened was, of course, the American Revolution, and then a couple of years later, the French Revolution. France actually looked at America for what was going on here and then decided to do that. When we talk about that, we'll get to there. Ironically, the Enlightenment thinking did start in France. Major height was during the mid 1700s, 1740s, 1750s. It was the place to be. People came there, they drank wine, they spoke about politics. It was very cool, it was very intellectual. They would go there and share ideas, and that's where that word, that philosophes, comes from, like these philosophers. It's like the modern day thinkers. This is them hanging out, this is what people did, talking, discussing stuff. This is a modern day group, I guess, from The Simpsons. So some of the philosophers believe, just like Newton had applied all this reason to science, they also felt that they could apply reason to everyday life. There was 5 important concepts that was their core, and you need to write these 5 down. First off, they believed reason. They said that as a thinker, we believe truth could be discovered through reason or logical thinking. If we have reason, there would be no intolerance, there would be no bigotry, prejudice, none of that in one's thinking, because we're being logical. Why is it logical to not like somebody because they're female or they're male? Why is it logical to dislike somebody because of their race? It's not. If you aren't looking at somebody because of their race or dislike somebody for their race, and you see somebody who is a bigot or you see somebody who is racist, it makes no sense to you. So that's what they were saying, reason. They said nature. There were these natural laws in the world, natural laws of motion, and then there was also these natural laws in economics and politics. You know, it's just the way things were, and we had to abide by them. Happiness. If you followed the rules, if you followed the natural law, you would find happiness. You're living a logical life. You're looking for the pursuit of happiness and freedom. There, in turn, you would get it. Progress. Society and humankind could be perfected using the scientific approach. Stop being in the dark ages. Stop looking towards religion. They felt that progress was, using science and moving forward. And liberty. Through reason, you would achieve this. You would be set free. We now see with our First Amendment right, you have freedom of speech, religion, travel, trade. You have all of these things that are granted to us by our Constitution. Prior to the Constitution being written with these group of men, they felt that liberty was the only way to be achieved was through reason. All right. Francois-Marie Arouet, Voltaire, as you might know him. That was his pen name, so he wrote under that. 70 books, you might recognize the name. That's that big quote I have on my back wall. He was an antagonizer. He liked to poke the bear, so to speak. He liked to rock the boat. He hated aristocracy. He hated government. Went to prison twice for speaking out against it. Kicked out of England. But he did like the English government. When he returned to France from being exiled, He did continue still making fun of France's laws and customs, because you have to think during this time, this was the age of Louis and, the French aristocracy and just them living the high life and just the customs, and it was just nuts. And while doing this and making fun of people, he was making the king angry, he was getting the Catholic Church angry, and eventually they put out a warrant for him, basically a price on his head, and he had to run out of Paris in 1734. He did have a lot of enemies, but that's one thing he never stopped fighting for, was freedom of religion, freedom of speech, tolerance. Just like the quote says on my back wall, "I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend the death your right to say it." He believed that everybody had the right to say what was on their mind without fear of persecution. Baron de Montesquieu, another very well-known writer at the time, he looked to political liberty, freedom of politics and government, and looked at how Rome and the Senate was, established. He basically said that Rome's collapse was directly related to the loss of freedom, that the people lost control of the empire, and therefore, once the people lost control, Rome fell. Like Voltaire, he believed that Britain was an excellent example of a governed country. He did like how the power was balanced. They had different branches of government. Within England, you have the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and the King and Queen. Very similar to what we have today, right? If you look at this picture, executive, legislative, judicial, that's where we got our info from. There are three separate branches of government. You had the British King, or Queen now. The ministers, they were the executive powers. They're the ones who carried out the laws of state, different than ours. You had the members of parliament, those were the lawmakers, the legislative. And the judges, the judicial power. They interpreted the laws to see it. Very similar, if not almost exactly the same as ours right here, right? He published on the spirit of laws. Separation of power would keep an individual or group from gaining total control. Just like in our government, a third of the government, every group has power. It should be a check and balances. Some of this should sound familiar to you. Just like our people who founded our country did not want another king. That's what they escaped from. So they wanted to make sure that the government had these checks and balances set into play. And you know what? We were seeing that England was working well, so we just copied what they did. This is an example of our checks and balances. What the president does, what the judicial branch does, how they check each other. See, Congress can veto laws, President veto, Congress passes. And you just see how it's all circular. Nobody can really gain 100% control. You can watch this video if you like. It's one of my songs. You don't have to if you don't want to. Rousseau, another component, person for individual freedom. He was an engraver, music teacher, was a writer. He went on to Paris. That's him. He said that science and art and reason would improve life for all people, saying that civilization corrupted our natural goodness. And he said if you looked at earlier times when people governed themselves freely without having somebody watch over them, they were happier. They didn't have a set of rules they really had to follow. You had a moral code. But as we became quote-unquote civilized, freedom and equality were destroyed. Because when you become, quote, civilized, you do have higher ranks of people. You have people who have more money than others. You have that equality taken away. He believed that the only good government was freely formed by the people, of the general will of society. That is a direct democracy. What that means is we do not have a direct democracy. A direct democracy example would be you're at the town hall and you're voting on a law, right? And the law can only get passed if everybody says yes. That means they ask a vote from every single person. You can't do that in our society. We have over 350 million people in the U.S. You can't get a unanimous vote. But that's what he said would work, a direct democracy. The tape is probably going to run out, so I'm going to pick up on another recording you're going to have to probably go back and open up the second portion